So I'm going to bring up a couple of other screens here, but I'm going to tell, once we get enough people in here, I kind of want to get a few people in here, and or once we get a little bit of time on this, I'm gonna tell you guys about the day that this occurred. There's been a lot of chatter. Unfortunately, a little over 2 years ago, I did have somebody that created a smear campaign against me, and they have spread vicious lies about James's case. You know, people that say that they stand against police brutality and that they're part of the LGBTQI plus community spread some pretty horrific lies. Never have any proof, of course. But I've got plenty of documentation regarding this case, so if anybody has questions, I can probably bring up some screenshots. I can probably at least answer some questions for you as well. Right now, I'm sharing out the live as well. So, again, whatever you guys can do to share it out, tap the screen, keep this live up would be greatly appreciated. So James was, I'll tell you guys a little story while we're waiting. I met James when he was about 20. I was about 24. We met in Florida back in I think it was like 93 or 94. I think it was 94 when we met. And we dated, like I said, for about 6 years. We had both just recently moved to Florida. When I first met James, he had moved down from South Carolina, and he had such a heavy accent that when I met him on one of our first dates, he said to me, he says, "You say what an awful lot. You got a hearing problem?" And I'm like, "No, I just can't understand you." His accent was so thick I could barely understand him. But he kept that accent, maybe not quite as strong as it was when I first met him, but he definitely kept that accent. James was the type of person that I can't stand spiders, but James wouldn't even let me take care of a spider like the way I wanted to. He had to catch it, put it outside. He believed in, peace, love, nature, especially protecting all wildlife, protecting all animals. The only things that James didn't like were these little things that were like gnats in Florida that we called no-see-ums. And those were the only things that he found acceptable to off. Like everything else he wanted to protect. But James was a very peaceful soul. James dated a guy after me. His name was Mario, and they were together for several years. In fact, James and his mom and I used to go over and visit because it was about 2 hours from me in Florida. He lived on the East Coast and I lived on the West Coast, and his mom lived on the Northwest Coast. We used to go over and visit both of them, James and his partner at the time, Mario. Mario, unfortunately, got James into substances. I have to be careful, I think, of what I say on here. But Mario got James involved in some substances, and James broke free from that. James broke free from that, and he broke free from Mario, and they had even been broken up for, I want to say, probably a year to 2 years before James was taken out of the picture, out of this world. But James had a relapse at one time when he went down to go visit Mario because Mario had gotten sick, and James went down to visit him. And when James went down to visit him, Mario evidently got him, I don't know, he caused James, or James relapsed with him there. So the day, March 17th, that James was taken out of this world, he got a call from Mario shortly before that, according to his aunt. This is all according to his aunt, because his aunt called me within hours of all this happening. He got a call from Mario and gotten very upset. Mario, I guess, was asking James to come down to Florida and flush some substances because Mario was saying he wasn't strong enough to, and James basically was saying, "I'm sorry, you're going to have to do this on your own," because James already had relapsed. So James said no, and he said to his aunt, hey, you know how we've been talking about doing a spiritual baptism? Today seems like a good day to do it. Let's go do that. So, Honeymoon Island was James's favorite place, by the way. They decided to go there. James had turned to his religion that he was brought up with when he broke free from the substances. So he turned to the Baptist religion, and they went to the beach and they went to go do a spiritual baptism, something that is very common. Anybody that knows anything about that, they know that, you don't need a priest or a pastor. You can go and just do your spiritual baptism, right? So that's what they were doing. And I guess somebody on shore, some Karen on shore, saw what was happening and called an officer and or called 911. And of course the officer, the DEP officer that was there, now keep in mind DEP stands for Department of Environmental Protection. So the officer was there to protect the wildlife and the plants. He wasn't there to, kill somebody or off somebody. I got to be careful what I say in here. He was there to protect the wildlife and the plants. The officer perched up on his ATV, saw James, went over to the water and called his aunt out of the water, waved to them, and his aunt got out of the water. James stayed in the water. Said, what's he doing? His aunt said he had gotten some upsetting news from a ex-boyfriend. Of course, she didn't want to, get into the whole story about substances and stuff like that. So she just said he got some upsetting news from an ex-boyfriend. At that point, she let the officer know that James was gay. Shouldn't have been a big deal. Even in 2012, we shouldn't have to hide. We shouldn't have to, live in fear that we can't just say that we have a boyfriend or something like that, right? I mean, we should be able to walk down the streets holding hands. We should be able to be out in public and live our lives just like everybody else. But even though James wasn't breaking any laws, the officer said, tell him to get out of the water. I want to talk to him. Hey, love. So the officer asked his aunt to go get him out of the water. Now, the way the aunt described it to me, again, this was all within hours of this incident happening. The aunt said that she went out to the water, tapped him on the shoulder, and said, honey, you got to get out of the water. And she said, James turned to her and said, no, bitch, if you're not going to help me, I'm going to do this on my own. And she even described, he called her bitch like as a term of endearment. And in the gay world, we do that. With our best friends, sometimes we do that. It's not meant to be offensive, but anyway. She said he just put up his hand. She goes, Joe, you know how people when they say no, they just put up their hand? She goes, that's all he did. He just put up his hand and said no. And she goes, before I knew it, the officer was in the water, had one hand behind his back in a handcuff, and the other hand was basically being pushed against the ocean floor. James was trying to keep his head above water because he was dunking him underwater. She said, Joe, you know how sharp the rocks are on Honeymoon Island? Anybody that's been to Honeymoon Island in Florida or any of those beaches over in that area, you know that there's all kinds of sharp rocks. They're like old coral that's just... It's coral. It's like it's basically coral rocks that have been somewhat washed, over, but it's the Gulf of Mexico, so they're not super smooth. They're sharp rocks. He was evidently banging James's head against those sharp rocks, and when James's head came up full of I don't know what you can and can't say on TikTok anymore, but I'll just say trigger warning in case it's needed. There was a lot of blood. There was a lot of blood. Everybody that was there said there was a lot of blood. When James's head came up, there was a lot of blood, and the officer started beating him, so of course now there's more blood, right? James's aunt said she got scared. All she could think of was that there was going to be sharks in the water, and that water is known for it, so she wanted to scare the officer out of the water. So she said, you better be careful. His former partner just got diagnosed with AIDS. She said the officer stopped, looked at his fist. His fist was all cut up. He looked around and saw all the blood. She goes, Joe, he must have thought it was too late because the beatings got worse. The beatings got worse. The officer had nothing but hate in his heart. Nothing but hate in his heart. Again, there was zero reason to get James out of the water. Dragged him up on shore, kneeled on him, The cause of death is asphyxia and blunt trauma due to complications from asphyxia and blunt trauma, but it's ruled a homicide. James's death was ruled a homicide. Officer Joseph Tactic, who was a DEP officer for the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department in Pinellas County, Florida, 21 years old, appeared to be having some kind of roid rage, was never tested that day. The victim was tested, but the officer who offed him was not. The officer who committed homicide was not. Government employees evidently do not have to get drug tested when they don't. Even if they commit a crime like that, they do not have to be drug tested, believe it or not. I know it's crazy, but I learned a lot of stuff throughout all of this. So, of course, the victim was, right? And of course, they found marijuana in his system. And I think possibly synthetic marijuana, which is something called Damiana. Now, there's multiple different kinds of that. You can look it up. There's stuff called Spice, and there's called Damiana. I know firsthand that James did pure Damiana, which is it's really not even as bad as marijuana, and it's definitely not as bad as the spice that they tried to make it seem that he was doing. So Damiana is something from the Latin culture that goes back thousands of years. It's very similar to marijuana. It doesn't have the same effects, and it doesn't show up on most drug tests. But of course, they wanted to look for anything they could to smear the victims. So, of course, don't drug test the officer, though. So Officer as a DEP officer. I actually have screenshots of the Florida Leo Forum, the Law Enforcement Officers Forum, where Officer Tactic and his friends were complaining about him being fired over this, saying that James was a bad guy, he deserved it. They made up this whole story that James hit his aunt. His aunt never said that she was hit by James. She said the opposite. So they made up this whole story to justify their actions, and within a few months, I don't even think it was the end of the year, he was hired in Pasco County, one county north, where he's still working at the Port Richey, Florida Police Department as a Marine Patrol officer. So he got a promotion and his dream job for offing a homosexual man. Then he joined the Army on top of it. This is our justice system. This is how Florida and the corruption within Florida works. In fact, you could even hear the off-duty fire marshal, his name was also Joe, who talks about it and how corrupt they are in Pinellas County. There were multiple witnesses that said James never committed any crime. He never tried to fight the officer. Day one, the newspaper article said that it was unclear why James was being arrested. Day one said that neither officers had any injuries. So March 17th, when the whole thing happened, 2012, that day, the Officer Tactic's right fist was bandaged up. That's the only thing you could see. It didn't look like he had any bruises, didn't look like he had any blood on his shirt, on his face, nothing. Just his right fist. That was it. Day two, they started to say that James punched the officer in the nose and was fighting back, and that he was resisting arrest. Still no idea what he was being arrested for, but now they started to say that he hit his aunt. Day three, it was that he assaulted his aunt. So the story just changed day to day, right? By day three, when James actually passed away on the 19th, so 17th, 18th, and 19th being day three, even though it was less than 48 hours, down. So this is not a justified homicide, as Bernie McCabe said, and the officer, unfortunately, was never arrested. He was allowed to go on to become a pew-pew carrying Marine Patrol. Now, what's going to happen? This guy's out on the waters He's prejudiced as all can be. And God forbid he sees somebody that he feels is immigrant, maybe somebody's flying a rainbow flag. Maybe somebody's got a Black Lives Matter flag. Who knows? This guy obviously has some serious prejudice and hate in his heart. Is he going to go after somebody else? Because he has shown zero remorse for taking a life. And then he's allowed to join the army, which, I'm sorry, I don't understand how you can get another job. He was literally paid to off somebody. He was fired for homicide, and then hired in Pasco County at the Port Richey Police Department. Anybody on here, feel free, call the Port Richey. This is what my goal is. I want to get a public outcry at some point, because that's what's going to be needed, because they know that the family can't say anything. So I'm fighting this alone. I need help. I don't need money. I need help. I need help getting this story heard. I need help getting voices out there to call the Port Richey Police Department to file complaints, to call the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department and talk to Bob Kateri, Sheriff Bob Kateri, to call Ron DeSantis's office. I've tried. These are all things that I've done, but as a one-man show, they're easily able to blow me off. If a lot of people do this, if we can get a public outcry, they're going to have to take action. That's the only time they will take action. James's family settled out of court with a financial civil suit. There has not been a criminal suit yet. There's a difference between civil suits and criminal. If you guys remember with OJ, the OJ case, they did the civil suit after the criminal suit, right? OJ was found not guilty in the criminal suit, but then they did the civil suit afterwards and they found him guilty and the family got some kind of financial compensation. In James's case, the lawyers convinced the family to do the civil suit first because there is a statute of limitations on the civil suit. So they convinced the family to do the civil suit first. And the family, in the beginning, the family just wanted justice. We all made a pact. Anybody could go to the Justice for James Facebook page, scroll all the way back to March of 2012, you'll see comments from his brothers saying that they're never going to give up because they know James wouldn't. They're going to fight till the day they die. They know James wouldn't give up on them, so they're not going to give up on him. You'll see my comments. You'll see James's nephew, who's no longer with us. He offed himself, in my opinion, for not being accepted as a trans. He came out first as trans, gay, and then bisexual because he just wasn't being accepted. That's the bottom line. He wasn't being accepted. And James wasn't around anymore, and unfortunately Sean took his own after he had a baby, shortly after he had a baby. Got married, and I feel a lot of his marriage and choices were from pressure. Unfortunately, he wasn't allowed to be who he wanted to be. But you can scroll all the way back and you can see there's only one person left from that small group still fighting for James, and I'm not going to quit. I didn't take a financial settlement. Okay, so if the family doesn't want me to speak about it, that's too bad. I'm not turning my back on my brother James. Anybody that's got an issue with that, they can go get the family and ask them to talk with me. They're welcome to come on this live. So I know I gave you guys a lot of information so far. I'm kind of sad that there's only 9 people in here, because the other night I went live and I had quite a few more people in here than just 9. But I really appreciate the people that are in here, very much so. If you guys can, like I said, share this live out. That would be great. I'm gonna try and figure out how to change the screen. Again, I can't figure out how to do that for some reason. And like I said, please don't, you guys do not have to do any of the gifts or anything like that. I'm not a fan of giving TikTok all that money. I just want justice. I don't want money. I've never wanted money. I just want justice for my friend. I want this officer to be put behind bars before he does this to somebody else, because I fully believe in my heart he will do it to somebody else. I really do. I feel like it's just a matter of time, just like with Kenneth Kubler, who took somebody's life and then assisted in taking James. Is he was supposed to be there to de-escalate the situation, not there to make it worse, which is what he did. You know, he literally was tasing James while James's body was shutting down. I don't understand. But, you know, this is a guy who Kenneth Kuber obviously had plenty of prejudices, which were obvious beforehand. I'm going to go back on the comments. I have a bad habit of not paying attention to the comments, and I apologize for any comments that I'm missing. I don't mean to. Anybody that wants to jump in here and go live with me, please feel free, especially if it'll bring other people in here. I really want to get some awareness on this case. Like I said, it's really... Of course you're not chopped liver, Missy. I really want to get a public outcry on this, and that's the only way that justice will happen, in my opinion, is to get some kind of news, some kind of public outcry, a lot of people to flood the station, not just where he works, but Pinellas County. So Bob Gutteri at the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department, honestly, I feel this guy needs to be voted out. Sheriffs are an elected position, and this guy keeps getting elected year after year. He needs to be voted out because he's protecting every officer that does anything like this in his county. And Pinellas County is a pretty big county. It consists of pretty much everything west of Tampa. Pinellas County is like Clearwater, Honeymoon Island, which is a little bit north of Clearwater Beach, all the way down to St. Pete. It's a pretty big territory, and this guy's in charge of that territory. He's not protecting the people. He's protecting his officers, even when they commit